All right, so we have one more panel, and then we're going to head to have a break. So this panel, I'm really excited about this one. It's specifically around trust and inclusion in our workforce. And building trust is essential to making sure that we get really great data from our team members, particularly when we're dealing with diversity demographics. So in this next panel, we're going to learn how to cultivate a diverse workforce by building trust in employees and helping them help us with people analytics. So we'll be bringing up Tovit Nazar from Yellow Brick Consulting to moderate, Lisa Chen from 1Password, and Sarah Northrup from ASP. So please help me welcome them.
Hi, good morning. Great to be here again. And welcome, Sarah and Lisa. Let's start by getting to know you a bit, your work, and about the companies that you work with. Lisa.
Perfect. Yeah, I can get us started. So for those of you who were here yesterday, it's good to see you again. My name is Lisa. I work at 1Password as one of the foundational members of our People Analytics team. My VP is in the crowd right now as well, of People Analytics, TA, and DIB. So this is definitely an area that is dear to my heart because we were not only the foundational members that kicked off People Analytics, but also the collection and analysis and reporting back of demographic data. So a really interesting topic. Happy to share my insights.
Great. Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Sarah Northrup. I'm the head of HR for ASP Security. Been there for about 4 years now. Prior to that, I was the head of HR for Sunwing Travel Group. I've been working with diversity and inclusion in employee analytics for well over a decade. Excited to be here this morning.
Great. Lisa, let's start with you. Please share about the journey of introducing inclusion and diversity in your organization, in the company.
Yeah, for sure. So 1Password is a security company as well as authentication. So even though the company's been around for almost 20 years now, I'd say our DIB and collection of demographics data really only started about 2 years ago with the launch of the People Analytics program. So I'm sure as my fellow security folks in the room can attest to, I feel our employees are very security conscious. That's what drew them to work for 1Password in the first place. So they were kind of saying, you know, we don't know where this data is going, we don't know how it'll be used, so it might be better just to not collect it at all, and just, you know, like let people be and be secure and private. So when we first joined the company, there was a lot of interest in looking at the demographics of the company, making sure that we're fair and equitable in our compensation, recruiting and promotion practices, but we just didn't have the information to say, where are we even right now? Is that already happening, or is it an area that we can improve on? So I'd say that our journey started with trying to demonstrate the value that collecting this data would be worth the trade-off of giving your personal information to the company. So we put together a roadshow and just said, here are the theoretical data points that we would love to collect from the candidate perspective, as well as the current existing employees. So we want gender, we want race and ethnicity, sexuality, if they're interested in sharing that, disability status, and so forth. We made all of these questions optional, so of course cleared it with legal and with the executives, and just said, if we have this information, we can start looking at comp frameworks from a DEIB lens. We can see if there are any drop-offs in the recruitment funnel, any drop-offs as we start going into the senior leadership levels and so forth. We did a roadshow with our founders, some of who are still very involved with the company, and then from there we went to our executive level, XLT and so forth, and really got the buy-in from the top. And then after that, it was a fairly simple process to actually launch the surveys and start collecting the data.
So it was received very positively and enabled you to start using that and implementing these notions in the company?
Yeah, for sure. I think trying to demonstrate what we would do with the data and being very transparent around that and showing the additional value. Though, of course, you know, there are still folks who are saying, oh, well, I think just in general, like maybe the culture is not ready for this type of personal data sharing. But I think just showing that the value we would be able to drive with these insights and making a diverse and inclusive workplace might be worth making that trade-off for some people, and a majority agreed.
So they trusted you,
Exactly.
and they saw the value. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sarah, let's hear about your end of that. It's quite different. Still security company, but more human, less tech company. Let's hear how you introduce that.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot more human. We do people guarding. So when we do security, we talk about security guards.
Actually,
I mentioned I'd been with ASP for about 4 years. So I joined in 2020, and I'm sure we all remember the kind of things that were happening in 2020. Not only did I join just as COVID was taking over Canada and the rest of the world, but I also joined in a year when a lot of diversity and inclusion activities were really important. So 2020 was the year that George Floyd was murdered. It was a year that there were demonstrations in Toronto by the BLM movement, as well as protests for the George Floyd murder. So what happened was, and what really drew my attention to it, I'd been with the company only a few months by the summer of 2020, and we had an employee actually call our office and say, you know, all this is happening in downtown Toronto, don't you even care? And it was really eye-opening and a real gap in the work that we were doing and really how we were focused on diversity and inclusion. And so as a result of that, we really had to kind of look at what our gaps were and understand as an organization, what do we want to do to make sure we're focused on this? And as a result, we started a diversity and inclusion committee so that we could get feedback from our employees. We did a survey and kind of just started to understand who was in our organization, and what their needs were. So how does analytics fit into that? We actually built out our HRIS to store a lot of this information so that we could start reporting on who our workforce was. The first year that we did that, again, 2020, by the end of 2020, we realized that for our company, which again is the security industry, we had over 50% women and actually more than 51% women in a leadership position, which is really unusual in our industry and something that we could really celebrate. So we were able to really build off of that. We've started an employee resource group as a result of that, again, data-driven. And we're using the data now to build out more employee resource groups and really focus on things like training. We serve markets not only in Toronto, but across Canada. And so diversity needs, inclusion needs change as you move across the country.
Okay. I touched on the fact that you both come from security, but different ends. Let's hear how trust plays a role. You mentioned, Lisa, tech people maybe are more scared of the data going around, but how does it play with your colleagues, employees? Sarah?
Oh, excuse me. You know, data became really important for us, and this, I'm going to go back a little bit further than even 4 years ago. When we first started collecting equity data, so at Sunwing, we were required to report for the federal equity program, so they collect some demographic data. We were doing it on paper with paper surveys, and employees really didn't like that. So
How come?
Paper is not a comfortable thing for most people. I don't know, by a show of hands in the room, do you feel more comfortable putting things in a computer or paper? I think it depends on your age, potentially, and your experience, but our employees really felt uncomfortable. So we were able to actually build out in our technology the survey right into the HRIS program, but also able to tell people where that information was stored, how secure the system was. You're now storing that information in the same place as your SIN number. And so that becomes really secure. It also gave us the opportunity, because the technology standardizes the communication as you're filling these things out, we could put comments and questions and answer things, and it was always the same answer. So again, the trust factor there, and our employees just felt much better. I don't know how many HR people are in the room today, but you know how bad it is to see paper lying around on desks. We eliminated all of that.
Okay. And Lisa, the demographics is quite different. Are they younger, you think, or how do they feel about the trust issues and their information going around? How do you make them feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, for sure. I would say it's definitely the humanizing element. So instead of focusing on here's all the information that we want to gather and store and analyze, we really started with why are we asking this and what do we plan to do with it. So very transparently, we wrote out who has access to this data. It's a very small group of people, primarily finance, myself, and HR ops. It's just a small team. Not even the executives can go in and see, oh, like, let's look up Lisa, what's her gender, XYZ. So it's a needs-to-know basis in terms of who can access this data and maintain it. So being very transparent about who can see this, On our internal company intranet, we also put what will this be used for, what will it explicitly not be used for. We also have the option for people to volunteer their information, but then say, I do not consent for my PII to be connected to the data. So you can still use it in an anonymous fashion. We have information just about the level, the role, and so forth, but it's not tied to their name or anything like that. So when we do the analysis, it's purely aggregate. We do have limits on a minimum sample size to report on. So we say if anything is less than 5, we kind of just say people also identified as this, but we don't say how many people identified as this. So putting in those guardrails, and I would say crucial to the success of the launch is getting buy-in from our ERG leaders. So employee resource groups, we have a number of really great ERGs who were instrumental in providing feedback on the questions we were asking. So first, is this worded in the best way that we can? Are we inclusive of all the possible drop-down options? And then they really brought that back out to their ERGs and said, hey, here's something that we as a company are launching together. So the human element.
Great. How do you come up with insights from the data? Do you use tools? Is it internal, external advisors? Let's start with you, Lisa.
Yeah, so I would say it is primarily internal right now. The way that it works is we collect candidate data from our ATS, which is our applicant tracking system. We have a really great response rate because the survey is right on the application. So when they're filling in all their information, they'll typically volunteer that. I believe it's somewhere north of 85% response rate, which is amazing. So from there, we do regular reporting on what do our candidate pools look like. In fact, we have automated dashboards for all of the recruiters. So we use Looker, so they can regularly just go in and see what does my pipeline look like? Am I seeing some sort of a drop-off at the recruiter screen stage? Am I doing everything that I can to make sure that we're presenting diverse candidates to our hiring managers? So that's one way we do analysis. We also have an annual DIB report that's coming out. So very exciting, we're in our second year. So this is, again, a way that we're showing our employees the value of the data that they're giving us because we're sharing it back with them. So it's saying, hey, if you respond to the survey, after we meet a minimum threshold for your department, we'll actually share back the insights to your department to show you what does the makeup of leadership look like? What is the makeup of your managers, of your ICs, and so forth? And we found that this data has driven really great conversations, even at the leadership level. When we're presenting a new hire, we say, here's what the makeup of your org looks like. Maybe we could, do more efforts in hiring women in leadership roles, or maybe we can look at partnerships with these different organizations because we're seeing overrepresentation of a certain race or ethnicity within your group. So yeah, it's been really great that way.
You mentioned a referral program that you have to do with the data.
Yeah, so that's another exciting way that we're using the data this year is we have a ERG referral program. So we're able to track in our ATS if somebody was referred as part of an ERG initiative. So when you put in your referral, you can say, I'm part of the Asian and Pacific Islander ERG, and I'm referring this person as part of our initiative. So every quarter, we run a report for our DIB team just to see which ERG has the most number of hired referrals. And then that ERG gets an additional budget added to their annual budget. So this quarter, I'm really happy that it was the ANPI ERG. So we had some additional budget added to our ERG's operating budget, and we were able to send some people to a leadership summit from that extra bonus, which is great.
So it rolls back.
Exactly.
The organization, amazing. Great takeaway. Sarah, how do you derive the insights internally, externally?
Yeah, and we do a lot of the same things from a survey and data analysis perspective. As I mentioned, the humanity has to be in everything that we do. And so from a diversity and checking and monitoring and analytics, the numbers are great. When we come to really building an inclusion program, we have to use those numbers to dive a little bit deeper. So with some of the things that we do are focus groups based on the survey, but we've also done targeted roundtables, for example. So for Black History Month, we have a roundtable every year where we invite people to, we comment again on what we've heard and what we've seen and ask people to dig a little bit deeper. We've done retreats and symposiums as well, just to get more and more feedback from our employees. We'll also do targeted campaigns with supervisors where we're asking them to really ask one question to employees if we want to dig into one topic. And the reason why we do that is, again, we work with a pretty diverse group of people across a number of demographics and geographies across Canada. And so what we're really learning is there's a lot of training that we need to build to help people come together and really feel included, whether that's how to work with other people or how to really make yourself, if you're not feeling included, what are the tools that you can use?
Okay. I feel like there's so much knowledge that these ladies, women, can give here. So just before opening into questions, some takeaways. We talked about paper, we talked about trust. Sarah, something that you can share with the audience.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that, from the DEI lens specifically, is to constantly gather that feedback. I think I talked about the data and the electronic tools being secure and safe and quick and efficient, and then the feedback from the human beings has to be layered on top of that.
Lisa.
Yeah, I would say if there's one key takeaway from this is that you can't improve what you can't measure. So I think, so many companies have the best of intentions. They say we want to build equitable and inclusive workplaces, but then when you ask them to see the numbers, they say, oh, well, I feel like I take a look around my team and it's generally pretty good, but we can't measure what we don't have data for. So I think that is a great way to get started if you are looking to kick off a people analytics program that's focused on demographics and there's a little bit of resistance. It's saying we're all working towards this goal together. I understand it's a bit uncomfortable to volunteer this personal data to your company, but if you do want to see measurable change at the company, at the leadership level, in terms of inclusion, then we have to collect this information, and here's how we're planning to use it.
Great. Let's open up for questions. Yes, please. A mic is on the way. Here you go.
Thank you. Yeah, Amardeep Singh. Great discussion here. So my question is, I myself have worked on DEIB. I add the B for belonging. And I'm going to give a quick context. I did a research in the second half of 2021. I was working on the challenges faced by different organizations in measuring diversity and inclusion. One thing I found, and this is from my own personal experience also, that while organizations do a lot of initiatives for inclusion and employees do feel included, they don't have that feeling of belonging. The feeling of belonging is always missing, mostly missing for diverse candidates or employees within the organization. So my question to you, and this might be a difficult one, what advice do you suggest or a strategy do you suggest to ensure that the belonging is measured and looked into properly in an organization?
Wow, measuring the feeling of belonging. Oof. I think when it comes to people analytics, there's so much of a desire to put the number to it, right? Like, what is our index on this? Are we moving the needle, X, Y, Z? But I would actually encourage, I think from something that Sarah mentioned is the focus groups. So I think even just within 1Password, we have ERG engagement groups, we have diversity councils. So we do have representatives from these different groups that come in on regular meetings, kind of report on how their different groups are feeling, any concerns that they might have, any significant cultural moments that are coming up that they might want to put on an event for or have additional budget. So I do think taking a qualitative pulse check at these regular council meetings is a great way just to get a sense of how are our people doing? Are we hearing anything from the ground? I think one really great thing about 1Password is that our employees are pretty vocal within the Slack groups. So I would say with the different safe spaces that we have set up on Slack, we are regularly monitoring them and then kind of seeing, like, is there anything coming up, any concerns that we need to address, any meeting notes that are coming from their internal meetings. So unfortunately, there's not one metric that I might necessarily look at, but I think it's regularly checking in with these groups, having monthly check-ins with them, and then just monitoring what are we hearing on the ground.
Great, thank you. I do have one more question, but I might give a chance to someone else first.
I had a little bit of a follow-up
Yeah,
to
yeah,
that. It's an HR answer. But, I think that it's such a crucial question, and it's honestly the thing that I struggle with not struggle, but I'm challenged with my entire career and the first thing you have to do is understand, what does belonging mean to your employees and your organization? I actually measure belonging using all those tools, but with a vision to what that actually is. So in our, we run a DEI survey, but we also run an engagement survey. And within that, I'm asking questions to really assess that. And there's different ways you can do that. And I could talk for an hour and a half on that. But my whole vision and my strategy is built off of Maslow's pyramid, if you're familiar with that. And really, where my strategy starts is really filling out the bottom layers, so making sure your employees are looked after from a pay, compensation, answering them in a timely fashion, all of those types of things. And then in your organization, you start to build on what belonging means for those employees. So most employees, belonging means they're heard, they're seen, and they're respected, right? And so I don't think you ever get to full belonging, because a workplace is a workplace and there's dynamics at play. But you have to really drive towards those sort of softer things that we can't see in the analytics, but you can use those analytics to ask the right questions and then make sure that you're in line with what belonging looks like in your organization. I hope that makes sense.
It does.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christine. I'm from Square Dance. For a smaller organization, what are some of the recommendations on building trust? Looking forward to building people analytics at a further date, but starting to build trust at a low level with our employees so that we can get to the point where we're collecting data and implementing these strategies.
One clarification, are you thinking of just people analytics in general or specifically for the demographics?
In general.
Okay, so this is a great question because I was in a similar position about 2 years ago, so it's really focusing on how do we sell this program and start small and then grow into something big with the executive buy-in. So my recommendation would be to focus small. I think it can be so tempting, especially when you're at these conferences, hearing what all these different companies are doing and taking down notes. You're like, I want to do all of these things, and I took down some notes myself. But I think it's looking at what are the questions that we're always getting from leadership. So, for example, when I first started, it was around time to fill. It was around offer acceptance rate. It was a really hot candidate market when I joined 1Password, so people were really wondering, like, what's our conversion rate? Are we getting people through the door? Who are we losing them to? So we just started with these areas. What data do we already have? Do we have any gaps that we need to start the data collection? So in our case, we were actually very curious to see what the compensation expectations were in the market, but we weren't gathering that data yet, other than the annual Bradford survey that was coming out. So we said, here's something really interesting to executives. We're getting lots of questions. We're not currently collecting it. So how do we work with our talent ops team to start adding that question to the job application so then we can grab it for analysis going forward? So my recommendation would be kind of just take a pulse of the questions that you're always getting asked, or when you're in a conversation and people are like, oh, it'd be really great if we knew this. Anyway, just find those moments and then see, do I have the data to answer this question and automate it? And if not, how can I work with my ops teams to start collecting it?
We had a question here, right?
Hello, hi. My name is Lisa as well. I'm from Rakuten Kobo. Really enjoyed your discussion today. And at Kobo, we have very similar diversity programs set in place and kind of issuing the same strategies. And this question kind of came to mind from when, Lisa, you were talking about how you would kind of take the gaps to maybe the hiring teams to let them know that, we have maybe too much or too little in these specific categories. So I was just wondering if you've come across any situation where employees kind of on the opposite side of the coin are kind of feeling like they were hired to kind of fill a specific quota or metric, and how you would kind of approach that. Yeah.
That is a great question. So I would actually flip that question maybe back to get a little bit more information on what do you think is driving that feeling for the employees? So do you think it's just like a feeling within their team where maybe they don't feel as much belonging, or perhaps like comments or the types of projects that they're getting versus other team members that maybe are not from an underrepresented background. So first, I might try to understand like where is that feeling coming from? Yeah, or, I mean, it's a question to you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it came up recently, and me and my VP were just trying to brainstorm like what they could be feeling, or not trying to single anyone out. We were just kind of stumped. So I'm not too sure really where that could be coming from.
So then I think to find out how we can address the problem, it might be even worth first trying to understand the root of it. So is it potential comments that coworkers have made, or is it the types of projects that they're getting versus, like somebody else from a more traditional background? Really just understanding what is driving that feeling. And then I think from there, you can kind of work on the next steps. Yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
At that table.
Hello, hi, very interesting conversation. Soha from HelloFresh. I have a question for you, Lisa. So you mentioned that when you're collecting the data, you do send back like a DEIB annual report to your employee groups. That's a very good idea, but does it ever fall back where employees are able to back calculate where that particular data is coming from, or ask you like what sort of actions are you taking? So how do you address that? Or do you just share an insights report, or is it more detailed?
Great question. So I would say it's more like, have you ever seen those sustainability and just kind of like global, what are we doing for the world reports that also come out with, like the financial statements and so forth? So I would say that our DIB report is similar to a sustainability report. So we don't only report the data, we also report, here are all of the ERG events that happened this year, here's what the attendance looked like, here is how our compensation team is using this data. So we kind of already preemptively expect those questions, again, because they do come up in town halls, in our Slack groups. So we almost expect the questions and answer them in the report already, saying like, well, like, what did we do for compensation using this? What did we use for hiring and recruitment using this information? So we do preempt some of those questions, though, of course, I'm sure there's some that we haven't thought of already when people see the report. And then we have Slack channels also where people can kind of just comment and tag our DIB team.
Awesome, thank you.
Really important when you're gathering data to know why you're doing it. If it's a box ticking exercise, it'll 100% feel like that to your employees. So I think when you're gathering this data, when you need to know why you're doing it and what you're going to use that information for, and then a really strong communication plan. The questions from this table were really good, and there's stuff that when we were talking about security, they were questions that came up really early on for us, and it's why we have a lot of communication. It's why when we send our infographic back on the results of the survey, for example, we're talking about what the goal was of doing this survey. So it's really critical if you're, if you're hiring a certain demographic because you don't have that demographic on your leadership team, then let people know that. I think it's really, the minute that you start just ticking boxes or just doing something because you thought it was a great idea, but you're not sure what you're hoping the impact is, your employees will know that, and it's going to feel really disingenuous.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle from 1Password, the infamous VP. We're lucky to have Lisa. She does a phenomenal job with all of our people analytics. The only thing I would add is we use that a bit to also what you were saying. We have a ton of conversations. All of this is often actually a lot of a conversation starter. So also to your conversation on belonging, the minute this triggers any kind of personal conversation, we make the time. So I will make the time personally. I happen to also own talent acquisition, DIB, employer brand, and analytics. So I'm lucky to be at the center of all of these things, but we make the time. We have 1,200 employees, we're going to 1,500, and we still make the time. Every time to have a conversation to gauge how they're feeling. I think belonging means being seen as well. And so we get a good sentiment. That's when we understand how they're feeling. That's when we dig into the additional concerns and whatnot. So Lisa always pulls me in, and together we'll go and maybe we bring an HRBP, but we show up together and we listen and we talk.
You had a follow-up question? The gentleman from Maple Leaf?
much for asking.
Great. Okay, so yeah, you're welcome to catch Sarah and Lisa afterwards, and thank you so much. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you so much.
All right. I was excited for that panel discussion on trust and demographics, and it really did deliver. I'm amazed by the number of security companies here. Usually I feel like I'm alone in my security industry, and we've had a really similar journey as 1Password, where when we started to collect that demographic data, I was scared for my life. These are people who would change their birth date just so that it wasn't in the system. And so the fact that we got to a point that we could ask them to share this data as similar journey to 1Password really said something about the trust. And what I heard from this panel was a lot about communication, and we have to talk to the humans, right? We have to go out and understand what those lived experiences are, what the resistance is, explain the why, explain how we're using that data. So thank you so much for that great session.